Welcome back. All right, so yes, I'm going to talk about league finances again. Yeah, I'm sorry. It's it's just one of these things that comes up, and I want to take different looks at it and kind of go through an explanation because I do sometimes think that there are people who just don't understand how it works or don't necessarily care how it works, which is fine. Which is fine. But what we're seeing right now with the National Hockey League is that this year the NHL's made at least 6 billion, and in all likelihood when everything's all counted out it's going to probably be a little bit above 6 billion. And that's after last year they made a record of 5.3 billion dollars. Now, 2013-2014 the league made 3.7 billion. And just on its own, if you just look at it enclosed within its own little bubble, the NHL's doing really well. So again, I've compared it to other sports. Today we're not comparing it to other sports, just the league on its own. Now, if we look over here, 2018-2019, the league made $5.09 billion. And it had expected in 2019-2020 to make a lot of money, to make about $5.5 billion. So, January of 2020, they sat down at the board of governors meeting, and yep, salary cap's going to go up a healthy amount. This is going to be a really good year, and general managers were planning accordingly. And then, of course, March of 2020 rolls around, and it doesn't happen. The league ends up making $4.4 billion. They had to pay money for the bubble playoffs. They ran that at a deficit. So 15 teams lost money in 2019-2020. If the league wanted to recoup some of that, they wouldn't have come back and played those bubble playoffs. They also wouldn't have had a season in 2020-2021. League revenues were $2.9 billion in 2020-2021. Remember, the salary cap is decided as being at around that 5 billion mark. So the half of the money that the players are dividing up, well, the league's not making that. So as I said at the time, the fact that they're not adjusting the salary cap down, this is going to make things ugly, and it did. So all teams lost money in 2020-2021. I believe that the Tampa Bay Lightning, even though they win the Stanley Cup in 2021, they ended up losing about $10 million overall that year. And they're just one example, but every team lost money. There were not gate receipts. And so the NHL had to pivot quickly, right? So you're not getting gate receipts. People aren't allowed in attendance in some situations. So you got to find extra money. So the answer is advertising, right? Now, another thing I wanted to mention here as well is that the NHL has a long history of struggling to make money. Before the 2012-2013 lockout, the season before that, 18 out of 30 teams were reporting a loss. So 18 out of 30 teams were working at a loss. I believe Florida was a $29 million loss. I think for Arizona it was over $30 million. So it's a lot of money going out. Now for billionaire owners, it's a write-off, right? And that's what people say, it's a write-off. And on some level, yes, but you also like to make money on what you've invested in. Now, what qualifies as revenue? I felt like today I wanted to talk about this because I think there's some confusion that sets in when we look at some of the stuff that goes on. And people say, well, wait a minute. So that's happened for them. Why didn't the salary cap go up? Well, because some of the income that we talk about doesn't qualify as income that would drive the salary cap up or down. So what qualifies as revenue? Gate receipts. The number one thing in the NHL is ticket revenue. So when we buy our tickets, that is the number one revenue generator, or at least historically it has been. After 2020 and 2021 took a huge bite out of their monies, they started really expanding advertising revenues, right? Now, broadcasting revenue, that's TV and radio. And of course, that got boosted over the last couple of years by ESPN and TNT coming in. And to some mixed results for hockey fans when watching the broadcasts, but, it's extra money coming into the National Hockey League they weren't getting under previous agreements. Publications, so books, magazines, whatever you find online that is put out by the National Hockey League, that money goes back to the players and to the owners, 50-50. Novelty sales, this includes licensing. So if you buy a t-shirt and if it's, a licensed t-shirt, the NHL didn't make that t-shirt, but they made money on that t-shirt because somebody paid for the licensing, right? And from what I understand, NHL licensing is not cheap. You have concessions in the buildings, so when you buy your $10 beer, or $15 or $20 beer, and you say, this is a very expensive beer, half that money goes to, of the profits off of that, I should say, the profits off that drink, half of that would then be, towards the league, and half of that goes towards the players. You have luxury boxes and suites, which I think, with gate revenues, it makes sense that all of that would be considered together, but yeah, I'll put that up there. And then there's arena sponsorships too. So the money for naming of the building and all of that stuff. Yeah, every sponsorship you see, players are getting some cut of that, including the ads on the jerseys, right? You have club sponsorships, and again, these are areas that the NHL has really worked on expanding. Again, because of gate receipts not being there in 2020 and 2021, they really want to make sure that they're insulated. So no matter what happens going forward, the league's going to make money, and probably at a record rate. And the other thing that it does, because I've seen people saying, "Well, I'm not going to support the league anymore. I'm not going to buy tickets," and that threat is nowhere near as devastating to the NHL as it might have been, say, 20, 30 years ago. And dashboard ads. So the ads that we don't like, the digital ads on the boards. Yeah, the fact that that's generating a ton of more money, and that that's part of the reason that the income is going to be above $6 billion this year for the National Hockey League. A lot of that comes from the dashboard advertising. So, do we like those digital ads? No, but do the players get extra money? Eventually, they will. The other thing this does. So when people see this number and they don't see the salary cap going up, they're like, "That's it. I'm fed up. I'm sick of this." But the reality is that with the income going higher, it's meant that the NHLPA pays off the debt from these 2 down years where the teams all lost money. And I do know for a fact that there were owners that were paying for staff, paying for various people around the building when there was no income coming in. There were some that laid people off right away. Wasn't it Boston laid people off right away, and it just was a horrible PR nightmare. But there were owners that kept their staffs employed when they would have been justified in laying them off, right? So there's of course parking, your parking fees if it's around the building, if it's a building that's owned by the team, then your parking revenue, your $50-$60 to park there for 3 hours. Half of that would go to the league, half of that would go to the players. Again, there's other monies that come out of that too, right? And then there's like your signed jerseys, all of the other various, fancy merchandise and other NHL licensing materials. All of that money gets added up during the year. And at the end of the year, they add it all together and say, all right, this is the owner's share of the pie and this is the player's share of the pie. Now, because this gets really, really complicated, because you can see, and I mean, there are different arena deals for different teams. Some teams don't get all the parking revenue. Some teams may not have full ownership of their buildings even. Although I don't think that's nowhere near the issue that it used to be in the National Hockey League. But the reality is that, all this gets added up, and then they have the escrow, where the players, take that certain percentage of their paycheck, and it goes into the NHL's coffers, and they might get it back, they might not. That money might come back to them 6 months down the road. It might be 2 years later. It's once they figure out what they made, what the final number is, and then they decide whether or not that money goes back to the players. Now, for these 2 seasons where the league was losing money, yeah, that money was gone, and the players knew it was gone. And it was a high percentage of their money that ended up going. And the interesting thing is that that's probably nowhere near what the salary cap would have done. Just imagine going from $5.09 billion to $2.9 billion. The salary cap would have dropped by almost half. And you would have had to have buyouts galore. You might have had to have the entire National Hockey League taking a pay cut across the board. So instead, they're like, no, we'll just leave the salary cap where it is. We'll leave it flat. We lost the money. You guys owe us. But because of the fact that they found all these other ways to generate revenue, that's going to be paid off during next season. And then next summer, we're going to see a big jump. But what's not included as part and parcel of the money the players get to divide amongst themselves is sale money, relocation money, and expansion revenue. And the NHL owners made sure with this last round of CBA negotiations that money stayed theirs. They didn't want players touching expansion revenues. And as I've said multiple times since they signed that, doesn't sound like a league that only wants to expand to 32 teams. It sounds like a league that wants to keep their options open and maybe consider opening up the expansion talks again. And that could be potentially $1 billion per expansion franchise. I think 32 owners would enjoy splitting, say, $2 billion amongst themselves, and none of that money goes to the players. Players agreed to that. And interest income. So any interest they make off anything, that doesn't go into the players' coffers either. Proceeds from loans, financial transactions. So again, just your simple money stuff that's not related to any of these items. players don't have any rights to that. The AHL income. And the AHL income's one that I hadn't really thought until I was setting this video up. You could make good money on an AHL franchise. Keep in mind that the AHL players are paid a lot less. For some of these NHL teams, they own the AHL franchises. They may very well own the building that the AHL team plays out of. And so, yeah, there's a good chunk of money to be made there that the NHL players don't see. And again, this is something the NHL players would have agreed to, that's in the CBA. It's not their money. And then there's the franchise values. And this is where people have been getting kind of ticked off lately. Well, if the franchises are valued at that amount of money, why don't the players get half of that? Because it's not included. It's not included in NHL revenue. And so, yes, owners are seeing their franchise valuations go much higher. I would think the sale of the Ottawa Senators for roughly $1 billion, that's going to make that very pricey as well. But eventually you would think that's going to get to the players, because if all the franchises are valued that much higher, the league should generate more money, and then that would mean that the players get more money as well. So maybe the league's revenues 2 years from now are around $7 billion, and then half of that money going to the players. That's a generous chunk of money right there. And of course, gambling ads, the interesting thing with them is we've seen just this huge proliferation. It has exploded over the last few years. And as I've said before, I don't condone all the gambling stuff, because I personally, for me, it takes away my enjoyment of the game. It absolutely does. Every time I get, hey, the score line says, hey guys, don't forget to bet, my guys glass over, and I'm like, seriously, I'm not interested. Can you please stop? And it's weird, because I can't imagine any other industry being able to just say, hey, here's more advertising right during your game. Like, I can't see a situation where a Molson ad would just jump up during a game. Are you having a beer right now? You should have a beer right now. Why aren't you having a beer right now? Beer would be good right now, wouldn't it? It'd be really odd, and yet they can jump up every 3 seconds and say, have you gambled on this? How about this? There's this here. You can gamble on this. Why don't you gamble on that? So the interesting thing is that elsewhere on the globe, and in the UK, they've been very careful when it comes to the ads. And they've banned athletes from doing gambling advertising. I believe it's in the UK. And I think it's in Ireland. You can't have gambling advertisements on TV before 9 o'clock at night. We haven't seen that. We've seen it becoming more and more permissible and permitted around North America. And the league and the players are both making good money on that advertising. I don't think that for guys like Connor McDavid, Austin Matthews, and others, I don't think they do it out of the kindness of their heart. I think there's probably good money behind it. There's a lot of money with gambling. So I wanted to talk about this because this is going to affect the NHL going forward too, because they do have the MGM tie-in, right? Now, they don't make any money off who you bet on. So if you bet on something and you lose, half the money doesn't go to Gary Bettman. That's not happening. But gambling revenue via sponsorships and advertising are huge, because according to one number I found, and this might be lowballing it, $63.53 billion made in the U.S. by online gambling and these apps you see advertised all the time last year. And that number is expected to grow exponentially between now and 2030. Like, it's going to be absolutely huge. In Canada, reportedly $2 billion in 2023, but that advertising is expanding around Canada, and that number is up a lot from where it was 5 years before. I think it was around 400 million the 5 years before. So gambling advertising has exploded, and in general, your ad rates, and I'm saying this as somebody who's a YouTuber, ad rates are higher with the gambling advertisements, and I would imagine it's the same thing for ad revenues for TV, that you're going to get more money from them. And so Rogers, ESPN, TNT, they're making good money off these advertisements. And then all that advertising revenue then goes back as well into the TV package, the TV package being what the players get their share of. So it's all kind of muddled together. And yeah, gambling online is worth a ton of money. It's not worth a ton of money because they give out big payouts either. So every time I see, hey, you can bet on all this and you can make big money right now, aren't you making money right now? I'm thinking, it's not how it works. It's gambling. It's not giving away money for free. That's why there's so many ads. You don't see a business that's losing money expand advertising, and yet gambling advertising has gone through the roof. So this is definitely something that I think is going to continue to cause that number to go up. with sports in general, the numbers are going to keep going up, regardless of what happens in the rest of the economy. And I would say this too, that when the economy's troubled, I think people are more likely to gamble. You're going to have more people who are, looking at some financial hardship and maybe take that last 20, 40 bucks they have and, Hail Mary. I know because I did it back before I had money. I would go and I would play Keno. I'd have $20 to my name, and I'd be like, this $20 has to last 3 days. I'm going to take 10 of the $20 and play Keno. And if I win on my ticket, I could win 40 bucks. And sometimes I'd win 40 bucks, and other times it'd be like, and I'm down to $10. Now, did I end up coming out ahead? No, because that's how gambling works. But sports gambling, rather than Keno where I'd have to, go out and find it, the sports gambling comes and finds you, and it's on your phone. So I can't imagine how much more tempting that could be for somebody who says, man, if I spend $100 on this gambling, this line here, I could win $500, and that could really solve our problems. That's where I really, the really tough side of the gambling is, or I lost 50 bucks here, so now I have to spend 50 to try to get it back. Now I'm down $100. Now I got to, so that's kind of how that works, right? So we'll see where the gambling revenues end up, but it sounds like they're just going to keep jumping exponentially for forever. And then they'll spend more money that goes into the broadcasting. You'll get more advertisements. The NHL makes more income, and so does the players. So now that part of the storyline is over, I want to get into the most recent valuations of franchises we have from Forbes. So the New York Rangers are estimated as being worth $2.2 billion. Their operating income, $90 million. They're very well off. The Toronto Maple Leafs, also very well off. I thought I'd wear Toronto because their operating income is $116 million. It is a $2 billion the valuation is $2 billion. And yeah, Toronto is absolutely huge, both in Canada and in the States as well. Montreal, $1.85 billion valuation for them, and their operating income, $110 million. So ton of money for those three teams. And so fans of those three teams want the salary cap to go away. They want it gone. The reality is that getting a number of exactly how the revenue sharing in the NHL works can be kind of tricky because from one year to the next it's going to vary. But top 10 revenue generating teams generally share the money with the teams that generate less. The idea being you're sharing that money out and you're making it so everybody's competitive, right? Now, Florida is at the bottom of the evaluations from last year, $550 million. Operating income, $5 million. And for the Arizona Coyotes, their valuation, $450 million, and their operating income of $6 million. So this is something that owners would use to say, hey, wait a minute, if we ever changed our salary cap system to a luxury tax or whatever, you're killing the teams that are at the bottom because they can't afford to do that. And the teams at the top would just be, siphoning off free agents, and because they'll pay a luxury tax. They don't care about a luxury tax. That's not their problem. They will gladly pay a little bit more money to be able to have a more highly paid roster and increase the odds of them winning, right? Which it does. I've talked in recent videos about how things were before the salary cap, and while teams that spent more didn't always win more, generally they sort of did. So we'll see what happens with the cap next year, of course. I mean, it's possible I could end up eating crow, and next year the salary cap doesn't go up much at all. But by all accounts, it's going to. And you have to just keep your eye on these issues when it comes to player income and franchise values. And we can debate whether it's right or wrong or whether it's fair or not. But the NHLPA signed the agreement. So the NHLPA signed off on it. So the money that they're not entitled to, they agreed to that. And when you've got players that are making $10 million or more a year, it is hard to get the public to feel bad for those that maybe would make an extra $50,000, $100,000 a year if these kinds of incomes were included in this, because that would drive up all of the money around the NHL, but it would also drive down how much money the owners make, and the owners don't like that. That's why we had the lockout in 2013 to go from a 57-43 split where the players got 57% to a 50-50 split, and they got it. In general, the owners will get the players to capitulate, and that's something we've discussed many times before. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.